Most importantly, the reason you're here is tonight is Alexander Girard, architect, creating mid-century modern masterpieces. And of course, during the mid-century period, Michigan attracted many visionary architects, designers, and theorists, including Mr. Girard. And while much has been written about his vibrantly colored design textiles for Herman Miller, the story of his Detroit curious encompassing his residential and exhibition curation has not been told. And so tonight the book, Creating Mid-Century Modern Masterpieces, is the topic. And the author, Deborah Lubera Kawsky, right? She's an adjunct associate professor at Medina University, where she teaches history courses and works with students and corporate partners on community projects. Born in Detroit, she grew up in Grosse Pointe, graduated from the University of Leggett. She completed her undergraduate studies in art history from Smith College and her MA and PhD from Princeton. She has lectured at the Detroit Institute of Arts, CRANBROOK Art Museum, and the Palm Springs Modernism Week on a range of art historical projects, including mid-century modern designs, Detroit architecture and art, Italian Renaissance painting, women and the arts. And it is a pleasure, a distinct pleasure, to introduce you. And can you explain who the other guest is here?
Yes, thank you so much. You know, I have done a lot of lecturing this fall. I was actually in New York a couple of weeks ago, but it's really a thrill to be lecturing here in Grosse Pointe because I grew up in Grosse Pointe, and I, like most of us, really did not know much about the mid-century modern architecture that is here. So it was a real thrill for me to learn about it. Very thrilled to have Rob Lubera, who is one of the homeowners of the McLUCAS house that's featured on the cover of the book and featured in the book. And also Ruth Adler-Schnee, our own Detroit design icon, who wrote the foreword to my book, yes. some great photos here. And in fact, Ruth trained in architectural design at CRANBROOK. She launched a career silk screening abstract shapes in bold colors onto fabric, and that was something that hadn't been done before. And she won the International Celanese Corporation Prize in 1950, and she went on to work with some of the great mid-century modern designers who, of course, were all in Detroit. You probably know now that a lot of the Michigan modern books have come out that Michigan was really kind of a launching spot for mid-century modern design. So she worked with EERO SAARINEN, SAARINEN, Minoru Yamasaki, Charles and Ray Eames, Frank Lloyd Wright, many others. So I started interviewing Ruth on the subject of Girard because, unlike many of these other mid-century modern pioneers, she is still working in her field. She's still designing. She works for Knoll and Anzia. She designs interiors for private clients. And so I've been very, very thrilled to work with her and to have her write the foreword. And she is going to actually read the foreword to my book right now. Yeah, you mind just turn? You can just turn around. There you go.
I first had the pleasure to meet Alexander Girard in 1948. He had rented a small storefront on Fisher Road in Grosse Pointe, where he practiced architecture and interior design. It was spring. I had returned to Detroit to establish my own interior planning business and to complete an order for a large silk screen, for the large silk screen printed fabrics in abstract designs, which in very bold colors. It had never been done before. And I was anxious to develop it. So I asked Girard for advice. He had a vast repository of information, and he, with great patience, outlined the responsibilities of and the possible pitfalls. in such a lecture. In looking back, I don't understand what gave me the courage to move on. It was very discouraging. But he was enthusiastic to share his idea of designing the conversation and of course his own fabrics. And at that time I didn't realize that he had been hired by Herman Miller to design their textile line. The conversation pit that he designed, the idea was to have a very small, in a large environment, to have a small space to create intimate discussions. He invited my husband and myself to come to his house, where we learned that he shared my love for color and for Mexican folklore. And the beautiful artifacts that that culture produced. Charlie Eames, who was still living at the time, and EERO SAARINEN joined us, and we all agreed the design should educate and delight. It should provide a framework to structure our thinking, a guide for how we look at things, and should help us to identify limitations and rules. Living within those rules, we all agreed embodied in good design, which I embodied in good design, is not submitting to them, but conforming to them out of respect for their existence. Girard and his friends had the ability to recognize and conform to these restrictions, creating beautiful places and spaces for all of us. So I urge you to read the book and to see some of his work. Unfortunately, there's very little left of it. Like YAMASAKI, most of the buildings have been torn down, and that's very sad. But we have Debbie's book, and so I invite you to share it with us.
So what I'd like to do is to give kind of a little brief introduction to Girard, and then I'll start focusing in more on the Detroit period. As I mentioned before, here's some photos of the McLUCAS House that we will look at in a little while. Here are some of the Girard masterpieces that are no longer with us, so it makes us very thankful to some of the owners that have been able to restore the works and move forward. That's not always possible. Here's a great image of Girard. There's a great quote by Jack Lenore Larson. I love how it says, he must be given credit for his single-handed campaign to inject the lively human qualities of joy and spontaneity into what has been probably one of the driest, most sensually impoverished chapters in the history of design. Meaning that Ruth Adler-Schneidt and Girard both really injected color and fun and life into design, where the modernist masters from Europe, a lot of them, Mies van der Rohe and others, their philosophy was less is more. So it was very much like the boldest color you could use was gray, it was like black or gray. So anyway, so hey, you can come in. Go ahead if you want to come in. Yeah, go ahead.
Please.
No, I don't think so. I don't know. Don't worry about it. I love these images of Girard because he really was a mirthful modernist. He really had a sense of fun and play that was integral to his design. On the left is one of the environmental enrichment panels that he designed for Herman Miller. On the right is a family photo taken in his Lothrop home with his wife Susan and his children, and these folk art masks. These are some of the masks that were collected. These are some of the more than 100,000 artifacts that the Girard family donated to the Museum of International Folk Art in Santa Fe. And if you want to visit, visit after May 5th because there's a retrospective exhibition of Girard's work that you might have noticed, or maybe it wasn't on your radar at that time. Summer of 2017, CRANBROOK had a big exhibition of his work, and it went actually to South Korea, and now it's going to be at the Museum of International Folk Art beginning in May, so I recommend that you visit. Just to mention, Girard's legacy is stewarded now by his grandchildren, Corey Girard and EERO Girard Maxson. And they've kind of got under control a lot of the licensing for Girard's work, which means, unfortunately, that the bicycle is no longer available. So, but Maharam issues the textiles and the pillows. Also, Vitra Design Museum, which owns Girard's, all of his papers, that's in Germany. And on the upper left is Herman Miller. They're reissuing a lot of these environmental enrichment panels. So basically, Herman Miller invented kind of like the cubicle, basically. So Girard wanted to enliven it, make it colorful. So these are very large panels that you would have put like literally on your office area. Here's some other publications. You might be familiar with Todd Oldham's gigantic, very heavy, wonderful book that is more of a visual monograph, and then at center is the catalog from the exhibition. But my book really delves into the Detroit period, and as I might have mentioned before, a lot of people today know Girard. It's on Etsy and Pinterest, and you see the love heart everywhere. But a lot of people only know him as a textile designer for Herman Miller. They don't know that he was an architect. And really all of his designs, if you look into his design, if you ever visit Herman Miller archives, you'll see how systematic he was in his approach. It was very much rooted in his architectural training.
That's
Yep.
Yamasaki on the couch next.
Yes.
And
Yep.
who else is there?
I'm going to show you.
I'm
Yeah.
so sorry. Okay.
No, you're good.
Here.
I was just going to say, as a prelude to that most people don't know that he was an architect, but he primarily did his residential designs during his time that he lived in Michigan, and literally no one knows that he lived in this, the most traditional of the Detroit suburbs. Yeah, so here's some images of his time in Detroit. On the left is the For Modern Living exhibition. On the right is the GM Tech Center, which is obviously in Warren, Michigan. And at center, he's with some of his friends and colleagues that he worked with. And it's Minoru Yamasaki at left, and then Girard, Charles Eames, and then with his head, we can only see the back of his head, is EERO SAARINEN. So why they didn't take more pictures, I have no idea. I mean, there's this whole exhibit at the DIA that you'll see in a minute, and there's not one group photo that survives, but this is the only one that I could find of them together. Girard actually was born in New York City, but his family moved back to Florence. His father was Italian, French-Italian, his mother was American. And so he grew up in Florence, Italy, and went to boarding school in London, and did his architectural training in London and also in Rome and various different other places, and then later in New York. But during his training, he would have been exposed to a lot of the great modern innovations at the time in design, such as the Mies van der Rohe Barcelona Pavilion, 1929. On the right is the Schroeder House. So Mies van der Rohe is the less is more, right, kind of guy. Schroeder House demonstrates more of the colorful approach to modern. And actually, I believe it was while he was in Italy that he first met his wife Susan, but they reconnected when he moved back to New York City. And during the 1930s, they met and married there, and they were quite a team. They worked together very well, and Susan did a lot of things for him because he was always working, but she kind of coordinated everything behind the scenes. But he always said that he could never have done what he did without Susan. And kind of fun, he demonstrated his love for Susan in design. On the right is a textile. It's called Sans Suzy. And this is an actual textile produced for Herman Miller, and you can see that there are interlocking S's. And that stands for Sandro and Susan. So you know how there's like Brangelina, like Brad Pitt,
Yeah.
Angelina Jolie? So this is like the Sans Suzy was like, and they're not a thing anymore anyway, but Sans Suzy was their name, their like relationship name. So they were way ahead of the game. On the left is the amazing cantilevered stairway in the Girard home on Lothrop. It's a great photo of mid-century Motown. And of course, you know, a lot of people ask me, why did Girard come to Detroit in the 1930s? And my answer is, who didn't want to be in Detroit, right, at that time? So people don't realize, you know, what a center Detroit was, not just for auto design, but for design of other types as well. And this is a fun image. This is Girard at his desk. This is one of the first jobs he had when he came to Detroit, because it was during the Depression, so there really wasn't a lot of architectural design going on. So he went to work for DETROLA, which was a radio manufacturer. And in fact, I bought my husband for Christmas last year. He collects radios. I bought him one of the Girard design radios. And it was there that at DETROLA that he met Charles Eames, who was also designing radios at the time. So a lot of these designers were doing other things, like whatever they could do. And so evidently Charles Eames wanted to meet Girard. He came into the office and Girard wasn't there. So he looked around at the office. This amazing desk was designed by Girard. All the radio designs on the wall, very modernistic. And he left a note on the desk. He said, I guess they don't need me here. So this meeting launched a lot of collaborative projects with the Eames, but also with other people like George Nelson, Charles and Ray Eames, Minoru Yamasaki, and others. So I'm just going to take a minute to outline some of the other connections that were happening at the time, because when I started working on this book, it started off as a book about the McLUCAS House, which is the sole surviving private residence designed by Girard. If you haven't seen it, there's a really fun article in the September-October issue of Dwell magazine, which you can also access online. The online version is kind of fun because there's a video interview with the homeowners, Rob Lubera and his wife Mary, and it's they did a really great job with that. So what happened was, when I started researching and writing the book, people asked me, well, what else was going on? What else was Girard working on in addition to the house? Because if you're publishing a book, they want it to be, you know, about some other things. So I realized that at the time that the McLUCAS House was designed in 1949, 1950, Girard was working with all of these pioneers of modern design on a variety of different projects in Detroit. And so a lot of them he met at CRANBROOK. He wasn't, or was connected through CRANBROOK. He never was officially connected with CRANBROOK per se, like teaching there or anything like that, but he did exhibit there. So on the left is a photo. Charles Eames is behind the camera. EERO SAARINEN has his hands in his pockets, and his father Eliel is on the stairs. On the right are some really cool corrugated cardboard sculptures designed by Girard and photographed by Elmer Astleford. Very dramatically, I must say. In around the time that he lived was leaving Detroit, so around 1951, Girard got connected with Herman Miller. What happened is that Herman Miller, if you're not familiar, was one of the furniture companies that was on the forefront of designing modern furniture in the 1930s. And Charles Eames was already working, designing furniture there, so was George Nelson, and they needed fabrics. They basically had all this modern furniture and basically cabbage roses for fabric, right? So we see a George Nelson coconut chair in the front, and then in the back is Girard's triangle design, very modern. Also around the same time, Girard was working as color consultant on the GM Tech Center, which was the first modern corporate campus, really of its kind. And GM consolidated all of the offices that they had in Detroit into one corporate campus. And of course, Eliel Saarinen was the first architect for this. The project started before World War II, but then it got stalled and was resumed after World War II. EERO Saarinen took up the project and brought in Girard as a color consultant. And there were several innovative aspects to this project. On the left shows some of the innovative ceiling struts that were all steel, of course, and how they integrated a lot of the other, systems of the building through these ceiling struts. And on the right is a view of the building that shows the glazed brick end walls that were on the building. So this was kind of looked a little bit like that less is more style, right? But then you get these bold, bright colors. So this was something that was totally different. The technology for the bricks was developed first by Maya Grotel, who was a ceramicist at CRANBROOK, and then it was taken over by the AC spark plug division, which of course deals a lot with ceramics. But Girard actually worked as color consultant for various areas on the project, including the styling studio at Left and the power plant and also Harley Earl's office. So the bricks are going to be important because through that connection he had access to those glazed bricks. Around the same time I discovered that Girard was in partnership with Minoru Yamasaki. So here he is directly tied to all of the big people, you know, in modernism at the time. Yamasaki had come to Detroit to work for the iconic firm Smith, Hinchman and Grills. And we see on the left, we see the addition to, sorry, I'm just blanking on the name, the Federal Reserve Bank, which was designed by Albert Kahn. So on the left is the Albert Kahn design, on the right is the more modern version by Yamasaki.
That's where the news and free press is there now too, aren't they?
Yes.
News and free press on that building.
Yep.
Yep.
And on the right is the Goodenough House on Lothrop Road, which was a collaboration between Minoru Yamasaki and Alexander Girard. So they actually had a partnership. I found an unsigned contract in the Reuther Library at Wayne State University. One of the most interesting collaborations between all of these people was the For Modern Living exhibition at the Detroit Institute of Arts. I don't know if anyone here remembers this, apart from Ruth, of course. 1949, it's coming up on the 70th anniversary. And this was an exhibition that was funded by Hudson's and was meant to showcase modern design for the home. And Girard and all of these other designers at Midcentury, they really wanted to focus on what was practical for everyday people in their everyday lives. They didn't want to just do this, you know, black and white house with no closets and things like that that no one could really use. On the right is a photo. You can see Eleanor Clay Ford, and you can see Girard looking on some of the other sponsors of the exhibition. I love the image on the left that shows the facade of the museum during the exhibition. And I went to the DIA and I looked through a lot of the papers there, and I found all the notes that the executive committee was going through when they were coming up with the concept for the exhibition. And guess who was on the executive committee? It was Minoru Yamasaki, EERO SAARINEN, and Alexander Girard, right? So all of these same people who are big in modern design in Michigan were also working on this exhibition, although it was primarily curated by Girard. He's the one who assembled this team. So he's one of those people that you've never heard of his name before, but he was behind the scenes of a lot of the big projects. He was just very quiet. I really like this. I found in the notes of the DIA a session where they were trying to come up with the concept for the exhibition, and they decided on what basically the rules were for mid-century modern design, what made good design. And they gave a list of criteria: freedom, honesty, simplicity, lightness, naturalness, free use of color, and new forms due to new technology. And when you hear the word freedom, meaning, you know, breaking out of the traditional box house with all the little rooms, open plan. Honesty means showing the materials, simplicity, etc. These are some views from the exhibition. On the left is how you would enter the exhibition. Don't you love this? Do you want the dead end of repetition? You see the Chippendale chairs, or do you want the new road? And of course you want the new road. The first room had a mural by Saul Steinberg, the wonderful illustrator. And I love some of these images here. He was kind of poking fun at people who drive a modern car and have modern appliances, and yet they have this carved, ornate fireplace. But can you see it has a plug? So it's kind of like, why are we doing this? Like, we don't wear hoop skirts anymore, right? You know, have modern furniture. There were three parts to the exhibition. The first one was that historical part. The second one was a hall of objects, and there were textiles, and Ruth Adler-Snape exhibited there. But there was everything from toys to textiles, typewriters, anything that was well designed was in the exhibition. In the Great Hall, this is the most spectacular part in my mind, and I would love to recreate this at some point at the DIA. This is the Great Hall of the DIA. The one with the armor, the one with the classical architecture, right? And in that room, and this was only up from September through November, so basically for 2 months, they planted live trees, they had these ramps, they covered up all the classical parts, and they had rooms by all the greatest designers, Florence Knoll, Alvar Aalto, Charles Eames, George Nelson, and this is the Charles Eames room. Very modern chair here. You can see there was a studded wall where you could just put kind of anything you wanted on there. You can see there's a box kite, some of the Eames plywood chairs, etc. Sadly, there are no color photographs that survive of the exhibition. However, I did find a few color images, including this drawing, which is at the Vitra Design Museum. And he had this innovative display method that they called the jungle gym, because it really did look kind of like fun, for the way they designed it. And I love how there's a young family here, and this is their target audience, like we want to get the next generation. I did find 2 color images though. This was in a scrapbook at the DIA. This is an advertisement for Pittsburgh Paints that has an image from the Florence Knoll room, and this is a collage by Ray Eames of the Charles and Ray Eames room. Of course, during the time that he was doing all of this, he was living in Grosse Pointe, which you would think, Grosse Pointe, modern? I mean, that just doesn't make sense. This building is no longer in existence, but this was right across from Grosse Pointe South High School. It used to be an old hamburger stand, and I think Francoise, I think was the name of the person. She moved, and so Girard bought it and revamped it, and this was his first studio. And this building is no longer there, it was demolished, but this is the opening exhibition in 1947. Furniture by Charles Eames, sculpture by Lily Swan Saarinen, fab furniture by Knoll Associates. I mean, wouldn't we all want to go to a museum to see that exhibition? I imagine seeing it in Grosse Pointe. Of course, when we think of Grosse Pointe architecture, we think of masterpieces such as the Albert Kahn, Etzel and Eleanor Clay Ford estate. But Girard took it upon himself to introduce modern design into Grosse Pointe. And of course he did that with his own house first. This is a great photo, and we have someone who lives on Lothrop, so you'll appreciate this right here. This is a view of Lothrop, and the Girards first bought it. So this is after Ridge Road, looking towards the dead end with the pine woods, and of course this was the last area in Grosse Pointe that had the last vestiges of the pine woods that were planted by George Lothrop. And so you can just see these 2 mailboxes at the end, and these are the 2 original houses on that site that Girard adapted and then built a 2-story connector, which was also the family room. Rumors are that this was a speakeasy beforehand, and so I think that the Girards, who were maybe not exactly the Grosse Pointe mold, would have really enjoyed this kind of unsavory associations with the area, that it was also the most natural area left in Grosse Pointe. Some great images from this Girard home. Here's this very unusual concept of like a built-in furniture angled partition wall on one side facing the fireplace. This is the fireplace, and on the other side was his home studio. Girard always had his home and his studio integrated in every place that he lived. I'm not sure about how safe the lit candles are, but it looks amazing. Really interesting addition that he had. From the beginning, he wanted to integrate the house with the outdoors. So he actually designed a garage door that would be attached to the living room and would swing out. So in the summer, you would have like a built-in awning, and then in the winter, you would swing it back down and you would fill in with partitions, you know, so that it would be warm in the winter. Not sure how well that would age though. Soon afterwards, he ended up designing other homes in what people who lived in this area called the enclave. So this would have been that dead end of Lothrop. We have the 222 Lothrop, which was the Girard's house, and then soon afterwards, 234 Lothrop was commissioned by the Girard's friends, the Goodenough family. And then later on, we have 232 Lothrop that was commissioned by George and Betty RIEVESCHL. You might know that George RIEVESCHL was the inventor of Benadryl. Moved here from Cincinnati to work for Parke Davis, won the rights for the royalties from Benadryl, and literally used that money to build a modern house. The Goodenough house is still on site, but it has been changed somewhat over time. The back part looking out onto the Pine Woods is still intact. But you can see here it originally actually had an open atrium. So this was the partnership between Yamasaki and Girard. One thing that was characteristic not only of Girard and Yamasaki's residential designs, but of mid-century modern in general, is that like inside outside, like the connection between the inside and the outside. You can really see that here. Right here we are looking into the living room. We're like Pine Woods are behind us. We're looking into the house, but we can see two exterior spaces, or outside spaces. We can see the open atrium right here, and we can also see this wonderful reflection of the pine woods in the glass. There's also some furniture that was designed by Girard, and also custom bookcases designed by Girard. This house, we think primarily Yamasaki, the architect, and Girard interiors. 1949-50, literally as soon as the exhibition at the DIA closed, he starts designing the McLUCAS House. This is the one that's on the corner of Vendome and Grosse Pointe Boulevard. This was designed for Jack and Kitty McLUCAS. They were a very unusual couple. Jack McLUCAS was the son of Walter McLUCAS, who had come to Detroit to be the first chairman of NBD Bank. Jack McLUCAS was a VP at NBD, and his wife Kitty, there's a whole fascinating story that you're going to just have to read the book to get the whole background on it, but she had lived in Shanghai, China. She had been married before, she had a daughter, and she was in a she and her daughter were in a Japanese internment camp and were repatriated, and she only met Jack McLUCAS afterwards and ended up coming to Grosse Pointe. So just very untraditional upbringing, but fit in perfectly in Grosse Pointe. Kitty McLUCAS and her daughter Jinx were literally the jewels of Grosse Pointe society. Everyone just absolutely loved them, and just absolutely fascinating. So you kind of maybe understand that only someone with a lot of kind of social clout could build a house like this in a prominent location. Those other houses, the Girard house, the Goodenough house, and the RIEVESCHL house were all in the Pine Woods. So that area was kind of like, okay, you can do what you want in the Pine Woods, you know, nobody can really see it, you know, and it's, but to build something on Grosse Pointe Boulevard in Vendome, that was a little trickier. And here, of course, you can see, whereas the other Goodenough house had been a collaboration with Yamasaki, here it says Alexander Girard architect. Yamasaki had already moved on to other partnerships, and Girard was the sole architect. And you can see we have that long, low, flat, you know, style, but it is very much in tradition, in keeping with modernism, but also some other traditions as well. Here's a wonderful image of the house, and it shows the site.
Was the house controversial from a standpoint of being built in that neighborhood, right?
Yes, definitely, definitely. And in fact, you can see the influence of Mies van der Rohe with the kind of minimalist aesthetic, but also the colorful aspect. This is on the right, the house of Charles and Ray Eames in California, which was built after the war. It's part of a program called the Case Study House Program. The whole concept was to use new technology for people who are coming back from the war so you could build houses inexpensively. So it's all done with kind of like prefab materials. It's absolutely spectacular. But also Girard was influenced by Japanese architecture. So he was interested in Japanese architecture, and we also think that Kitty McLUCAS had spent a lot of time in Japan, so perhaps she dictated some of the overt Japanese elements. But this idea of the inside and the outside, the open floor plan, and the use of wood as a structural and decorative material is very Japanese. Also, a lot of the screens, there are shoji screens in the McLUCAS house, and it's specified on the plan, shoji screen. I started looking as I was writing the book again, I was noticing how all of these projects came together, and I realized that the McLUCAS house, which was designed in 1949, right after the For Modern Living exhibition closed, basically was the embodiment of all of the principles of the exhibition, but it also demonstrated the best parts of the other projects that Girard was involved in at the time. So speaking of those characteristics, remember I said freedom was one of them? This is what the floor plan looks like. It's basically free-flowing all around an open atrium. So here's a model. Girard always did models of his houses. So here's a model of the McLUCAS house, and you can see the atrium. The house is organized along two axes. There is a, I'm getting, let's see, diagram. Yeah, there's a north-south axis. Let's see, where am I? Yeah, north-south axis here, and an east-west axis. So we're looking east-west here. You can literally look through the house, and here's the north-south axis, and you're looking through here towards Vendôme. Very different from traditional Grosse Pointe homes. The entryway to the home is pretty much transparent. You're looking into the house. There's no rounded arches, there's no decorative aspects. And here we're basically looking at one of the shoji screens here through a glass window. Another neat thing is, as you approach the home, there is a partition wall that kind of guides you into the house, and as you'll see when I show you the next slide, it appears to extend through the glass into the house. So here's that same wall. So this is pretty amazing, and this is one area where I have to mention the importance. This house was very much intact to its 1950s state, but needed quite a bit of renovation in a lot of the wooden surfaces. As the homeowner often says, it's like owning, 4,000 square wood boat, right? You know, if it's well maintained, it's beautiful. If it's not, you know, it doesn't look so great. So one of the issues with the house is that the wooden posts on the outside, the exterior of the home, had all been painted black. I think just for practical reasons, just taking care of the wood. So this whole, see how it looks like the inside and the outside are just connected? If you had a black post on the other side here, that kind of ruins the effect, right? So they had to do extensive sanding by hand of those wood surfaces. Wood experts did that. So that was part of the great restoration that was done in the home. So here's a great view of this, and again, another aspect of this freedom concept, letting the outside in. Honesty. This is a great view looking into the living room. The living room was the core of most mid-century modern home designs, and for sure all of the homes that were designed by Girard. They believed in an open, free-flowing space, one that is multifunctional. So here we have a hearth, but it's not a hearth that is just a wall. It's something that is, you can look over into the next spaces. And guess what we have here? Remember those ceiling beams from the GM Tech Center? We see something very similar here. And you don't normally see the steel beams in home designs. So this would be a characteristic of honesty, so showing the structure. I'm just reminding you about the GM Tech Center. This is the Charles and Ray Eames home in California, and they have similar steel beams. You can see this is a view from the front door, kind of looking into the living room. You can see into these other spaces, but you can also see into the open atrium. And you can see one thing that was really wonderful, and you know how you're working on a project and you just kind of kick yourself, like, why have I not finished this yet? So every time I got frustrated with myself, why have I not finished this book? Something new fell into my lap, and I had called the Vitra Design Museum in Germany, which has all of Girard's papers, and I had asked them, do you have any drawings by Girard? Do you have any papers relating to the McLUCAS House? No, we don't have anything. So literally, as I was still working on the book, thank goodness, they called and they said, we just found a box of original drawings by Girard for the McLUCAS House. Thank goodness I didn't publish the book yet. So, wonderful drawings. So you can see how these steel beams were integral to the design from the beginning. You can also see, we're going to talk at the very end about how Girard invented the conversation pit. And you might be familiar with that term, the sunken living room that was kind of a big thing in the 50s and 60s. Girard basically invented that concept. And you can see he's starting to think about it here, but this is just with furniture aligned with the hearth. Here's a wonderful drawing that shows how he thought of everything. This couch he designed, and you can see there are all these measurements here. He's trying to align everything, sight lines, furniture relative to other elements in the room, a variety of textures. We have wood, we have plants, we have metal, and then this, which would become glazed brick. Also, designed a lot of the furniture out of materials like Formica. Formica was the modern material, right? I love this ad. It says, you can have guests over, you don't have to worry about a wet glass, it's easy to clean. Now, all of the people that Girard designed for all had live-in maids, so I don't think they did want to clean. But it made it easier for the maids, that's for sure. But it also was very fun, and these drawings are amazing. You can see that Girard is really trying to sell his clients on modern design and how it will work for their lives. It will make your life easier. And look at this, what's on the table. The martini glasses, the lit cigarettes, and Life magazine. And in fact, Jinx McLUCAS, the daughter who grew up in the home, was actually featured in Sports Illustrated. She was on a ski trip in Switzerland, and she was featured in Sports Illustrated. So everyone was reading all these magazines. And significantly, these drawings are marked with the seal Alexander Girard, architect. So he really felt, and I know Ruth feels this way too, he was not an interior decorator or an interior designer. He was an interior architect. Everything related. The architect related to the furniture, related to the site. It was all one design. Here's a great photograph that was done during the era that the McLUCAS family lived in the home. And you can see this is a coffee table that he designed. This is a magazine rack. And this is one of the glazed brick walls. And you can see on the wall, Kachina dolls. So Girard was a pioneer folk art collector, but Kitty McLUCAS, who grew up in, who was one of the patrons of the house, her sister was married to a very influential family in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So they would have been very connected with folk art in Santa Fe as well. Another characteristic, the free use of color. You can see that the atrium, and I'll show you a better photo in a minute, has these boldly colored glazed bricks. Bold yellow, bold red, bold blue. And in many cases, in this case here with this wall, you can't see it, but the wall extends from outside to inside. Here's a view of the atrium, and you can see this is a plan. It shows how this yellow brick wall extends from the atrium into the laundry room here, and then all the way into the master bedroom. And then there's a red glazed brick wall that extends into the hallway that's known as the gallery. This night view really showcases the colors of the walls. And I'm very lucky that the homeowner, Rob Lubera, is a master photographer. And so I was able to really customize the photos that I wanted in the book. I would say, I really need a photo that shows, the interplay between inside and outside in such and such a place, and then, okay, I'll work on it, so. And the bricks, these are the actual bricks from the GM Tech Center. So this is the amazing thing. The GM Tech Center started in the 40s, and the GM Tech Center was actually not open to the public until 1956. This house was built in 1950. So a lot of people will say, oh, A lot of houses have bricks, you know, glazed bricks of that era in the 50s and 60s. A lot of homes and businesses had glazed bricks from the GM Tech Center after 1956, after the Tech Center opened and the architects kind of dispersed and did their own projects. This is the only house that had bricks possibly before they were in the GM Tech Center. So this is very significant. And of course, the only connection would be through his friend EERO SAARINEN. I've talked with Susan Skarsgård, who is the leading expert on the GM Tech Center, and she's confirmed that these are the exact same bricks. And some of the loose bricks on the back, they're stamped Claycraft. Claycraft was the company that GM basically, you know, hired to produce these bricks specifically for them. Here's a great photo that shows that, you know, glazed brick wall going all the way inside into the master bedroom. And here's a wonderful original drawing that shows this built-in desk, which is still there, and a wonderful chair designed by Don Knorr for Knoll that is very rare, would be neat to have in the house again, but they're on first dibs for like $10,000. So here's a view of the GM Tech Center, and it just shows that same inside-outside brick. And this is a fun comparison. These are three things that were all happening at the same time. This is the GM Tech Center. This is the McLUCAS House. And this is a drawing that Girard did. Never ended up using this. This is a drawing for the For Modern Living exhibition. So that great hall in the DIA, he ended up covering the walls, but it looks like at one point he was thinking of putting these bright colors in there. So again, you know, the GM Tech Center is EERO SAARINEN. These other two are Girard, but they're all connected. They're all talking to each other. They're all sharing ideas. Oops, sorry. Here's a great, naturalness is the last of those criteria. And here we have basically a geometric man-made design, yet somehow when we look at this drone shot, which is amazing, it shows how integrated the home is into its natural setting. And really, you know, the McLUCASes did not live in the Pinewoods, so they're on a corner that is, you know, for Grosse Pointe standards, you know, pretty busy, and yet it seems remarkably private. This is the master bedroom, very open, and this is one of my favorite photographs. You are in the master bedroom, right by the wall, and it looks like there is no wall. Another view, you're actually in the master bed, you're in the backyard now, you were there before, now you're here, and you can see through the house and you're looking into the atrium.
Were these single pane windows?
Yes.
Wow.
They feel like it.
Utility bills. Yeah, utility bills, yes. I'm sorry.
There's a specification in some of the notes that Girard wrote for the trades. There's a document called the Index to Trades, and certain of the windows were specified as being like thicker glass, probably for that reason. But yeah, they only had certain specs at the time.
Right.
This is one of my favorite photos. This is kind of the iconic photo of the house, shot by the owner, featuring one of the homeowners. And you can see how transparent the home is. You can literally look through it. And this is just a spectacular photo. This is another spectacular photo of the master bathroom. In the original Girard home, and in this home, and actually all of Girard's home, there was a very, they had, you know, large closets, a lot of built-in storage. This wonderful trifold mirror. Behind these mirrors, you can open it, and there's like shoe storage and all that kind of thing. I mean, it's the kind of thing you'd see like at a design show today. But who had a bathroom like this in 1950? I mean, really, hardly anyone. And also of interest is this magnificent Harlequin tile. And when the Luberas moved into the house, there was a shag carpet on top of that.
Oh, jeez.
And they started pulling it up, and I think in 2013, I had met Ruth back in 2011 when I started doing research for the book. In 2013, they had the first of the Michigan Modern exhibitions at CRANBROOK, and they had a symposium. And I think it was then that Robin Mary Lubera met Ruth Adler-Schnee, ended up hiring her to be the design consultant for the home, because they had some projects they needed to do. They needed to do some work in the kitchen. Not structurally, they kept, you know, the basic structure, but they had to get a new flooring. They had to do like new tile in the bathroom shower. You know, it's like, who do you get to advise you on that? And how about an actual mid-century designer that worked with Girard? So Ruth took one look at this tile and was like, that's sane. That's original, you know, Harlequin tile. It's absolutely spectacular. After he was done at the McLUCAS house, Girard did one other home in Grosse Pointe. He went back to this enclave, and I'm using that term because I've actually spoken with Gary and Jan RIEVESCHL, who grew up in this house, the RIEVESCHL house. Again, the RIEVESCHL, George RIEVESCHL invented Benadryl and used the royalties to build this. They called this little area at the end of Lothrop the enclave. The RIEVESCHL house was really spectacular. You know how when you buy a lot and you hire an architect, you usually level the site and build the house on a level site? Girard did the opposite. He found one of the highest points in Grosse Pointe and a site that was actually a little bit hilly, and he adapted the house to the contours of the site. It's a little bit hard to read this, but if you look here, this is the outline of the house, and of course it's very unusual. There's a living room block, a bedroom block, this was an art room, and this is the service wing, and this is the carport, and they're all connected by these glass corridors. This is a Charles Eames photo. I think he was standing like on the top of the picnic pavilion taking this photo, and this is the same angle. So he's looking at the bedroom wing, and this is the glass corridor going to the living room wing. So see where it says plus 30, plus 12, plus 30, minus 6. This corridor starts off at plus 6, it goes to 0 to minus 6, and this is minus 12. These are all the relative elevations of the house. So the difference in height between this was 30 and this was 12. This is the conversation pit. So it's just amazing. So I know, like, who would do that?
Was that stairs or a ramp?
This was a ramp.
Yeah, wow.
Yep, and this, you can see how the ramp goes down.
Oh, yes, okay.
So just amazing. This is the conversation pit area of the RIEVESCHL house. So when a lot of people know, what most people know about Girard's architecture is this house. This is the Miller house in Columbus, Indiana. If you're interested at all in architecture, especially modern architecture, you need to make a pilgrimage to Columbus, Indiana, which is just south of Indianapolis. Basically, yeah, Cummins Engine was located there, and the family that ran Cummins, they wanted to bring the best talent to this little town in Indiana. And they're like, how are we going to get people to come here? So they said, we're going to hire the best architects and create this amazing city. So they offered to pay the architect fee for any major architect who would come to Columbus and build a building there. So the school, the firehouse, you know, all these things are like by amazing, famous architects. So, but the Miller family hired EERO SAARINEN to design a home for them, and Girard did the interior. So he's listed as an architect, but he's pretty much universally associated with this unbelievable 50-foot long storage wall and this conversation pit, so this sunken area in the Miller house. So a lot of people think, oh yeah, Girard's conversation pit, Columbus, Indiana. The first conversation pit was actually in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. So that's pretty amazing. A lot of people don't know that. So this is the RIEVESCHL conversation pit. That is, that house is no longer standing, but luckily this is the only color photograph that I was able to find. This was shot by Balthasar Korab. So that just brings us to, you know, this, just how grateful I am to Rob and Mary Lubera for buying and restoring this home. Every year they have this amazing art party at their home for like 200 people. They feature different artists. I think it was 2 years ago it was Hubert Massey. This year, who was it this year? It was you. So, that's where I was. It was Rob Lubera's photographs. Yeah, we had Christina Liedtke, who is from Grosse Pointe, is a dress designer. We've had all amazing artists that have been featured. And I always think when I'm at this party, I think this could have very easily never happened because the house, you know, could have been torn down and like 2 houses built in its place. So it's nice to see, but it's a lot of work. I remember when I was writing the article for Dwell, I was trying to come up with a clever title. And I think my idea was like a mid-century modern fairy tale. You know, this couple, they find this house and they restore it and, you know, all these wonderful things happen. And the owners were like, I don't know if I'd use the fairy tale part, because anyone who's bought a historic home, and I think a lot of people here in Grosse Pointe, it might be a historic home of a different era, right, older even. It's not a fairy tale. You know, it's worth it in the end, but it's not a fairy tale because there's a lot of work that goes on in the restoration process. Let's see, I think that is the end. I think the last one I just wanted to show you, just talking about Ruth. For Modern Living at the DIA, this was the textile area, and she showed her work there. Yeah, so I love this quote by Ruth. My goal has been to create aesthetic unity of pattern, color, and texture, and to address human needs of pleasure and economy. It is a search for perfection that will never go out of style. And I think that was very true of Girard as well, so that's why I'm so grateful for Ruth's comments and help on my book and for her writing forward, because she is really the closest thing that we have to, you know, to Girard today. She's really pretty much the sole survivor of that era, and we're very lucky to have her here tonight. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. So if you have any questions, feel free to either ask now, or I don't know what our time's like. If you want to, you know, if you need to leave, that's great too.
And you'll be signing books, of course.
Yeah, we have some books to sell right here. So if anyone's interested, these books are all signed by myself and Ruth Adler-Schnee. So thank you so much for coming.
Questions, please.
Yeah.
Questions, please.
So which of the houses are still there?
Which?
On Lothrop, the Goodenough house is still there. So, but that one has been changed. The atrium is no longer there. That was, but the living room of the home and, you know, the connection with the pine woods is still intact. And then the McLUCAS house. Those are the two.
This is just kind of a silly question, but the people that live in the house have the same name as your maiden name, Lubera?
Yeah, this is actually my brother Rob.
Okay.
That's kind of how I got started in this, because my PhD from Princeton is in Italian Renaissance art. But I must say Girard was from Italy, and he was kind of a Renaissance man, so I think that kind of fits. But, you know, they actually bought the home in 2009, Rob and his wife Mary, and I give them so much credit because a lot of people will say, when I was writing the article for Dwell, the executive editor was asking me, well, when did they find out it was a Girard house? And I said, you know, we knew it was a Girard house, his name's on the blueprints, but they didn't know the significance of that because they weren't really into modern design. They just fell in love with the house. So I give them so much credit for falling in love with the house, not knowing. Like a lot of people will say, well, I want to buy a Girard house, or I want to, you know, buy a house by a famous designer. You know, but to recognize, to not know that, and to buy the house just on its own merits, I think, you know,
So
give you a lot of credit.
their purchase of the house came before the book.
Yes, so they purchased the house, and then they asked me, you know, can you do some, you're an art historian, can you do some research on Alexander Girard? And, you know, that kind of all came from that. So I'm very grateful to them, and then, you know, obviously through Ruth, and just so much. What I really enjoyed, to tell you the truth, I love doing the research on Grosse Pointe and looking through all of those maps at the Historical Society and seeing, you know, all the, you know, the Macmillan, you know, the racetrack, and, you know, all these different things, and how the streets evolved over time. It's absolutely fascinating. It really is. So there is a whole section in the book because I didn't want to write about Grosse Pointe without showing how innovative this was in Grosse Pointe. So if you take this house and you put it in California, you know, it's still going to be spectacular, but it's just kind of another California modern house. I mean, the real innovative aspect of it is where it is in Grosse Pointe. So I have a whole section on traditional Grosse Pointe architecture just to show the juxtaposition. So.
More questions? If not, thank you so much.
All right.
Go ahead and sign.